Daft Punk. They have been my favorite electronic music duo in the world of electronic dance music. I have talked about them a few times on my channel, and I can't help but get the feeling that the record that I'm reviewing today is always going under the radar for music regardless. I understand that it has gotten a lot of recognition, it has influence, and an understanding of how it works, but how did Daft Punk get here exactly? That's a question that has been answered multiple times, but I think that there's more than just two guys meeting each other at college, talking about their love for music, and making an album. Look, I don't hear much about the songs themselves, and not just the key songs like the ones everyone knows. I'm talking about almost every single track from Homework in 1997 and what purpose they actually serve. So that's why I'll be taking you through the story of Daft Punk's Homework.
On l'a fait, quoi. On n'a rien fait d'autre et tout a été. Il y a eu beaucoup autour de ça. Bah, c'est attendre de prendre des vacances et voir si on arrive.
House music was already forming by the time the 1980s and 90s rolled around, specifically in Chicago with pioneers like Frankie Knuckles, and it spread worldwide. Detroit techno was another influence that was all over the clubs in Europe. Long ago, I did a video before it became a commercial flop in the music industry. Despite it being quote-unquote dead, underground clubs still kept dancing the night away. There were extended versions of tracks and remixes, and they created their own music using drum machines and synthesizers, which eventually became house music. The early signs of house music were at a club in Chicago named The Warehouse. DJ Frankie Knuckles would blend disco, electronic music, soul and drum machine rhythms into long hypnotic sets. The sound of house music was repetitive, groove-focused, built for dancing, and minimal compared to disco. Over in Detroit, there were three individuals known as the Belleville Three: Juan Atkins, Derek May, and Kevin Saunderson, who began creating a sound that combined funk, synthesizers, and the robotic percussion of groups like Kraftwerk. This style would become known as techno. This also meant a revolution in music technology for both of these genres. It was cheap enough to be accessible without needing a major label budget. Machines like the Roland drum machines became staples of house and techno production, and producers built tracks in bedrooms and basements. By the time the 1990s were starting to roll around, house and techno had already crossed over into Europe. British club culture was exploding, as well as acid house and rave culture. Records from Chicago and Detroit were being played at the UK and France. That's where our duo comes into play: Thomas Bangalter and Guy Manuel de Cristo, as they both grew up around this time. As the 1990s arrived, they were taking in the influences of these artists and earliest forms of house and techno, and were about to create something new. The story of these two boys on how they met was surprisingly just simple. In 1987, Thomas and Guy Manuel met while attending the C. Connaught Secondary School in Paris. They bonded over a shared obsession with music and movies from the 1960s and 70s. Now get this, they weren't necessarily electronic musicians when they met. Their first move was to be a rock band. By 1992, they had formed a trio called Darlin with Laurent Ronkowitz. Thomas played bass, Guy Manuel played guitar, and the trio recorded a handful of songs inspired by garage rock and bands like the Beach Boys. Unfortunately, the band wouldn't last very long after a British music critic described their music as, quote, a daft punky thrash. The duo took the insult, and Daft Punk was the name of their new electronic music project. After Darlin pretty much fell apart. In the same year, the pair became fascinated by electronic dance music and the club culture at large. Instead of chasing rock, they started exploring house and techno. Thomas would later recall falling in love with electronic music. Now, the creation of Homework was probably one of the simplest ways you could have done it. Do it from the comfort of your own home. Thomas Bangalter explained that the album was called Homework because it was made at home, cheaply, quickly, and spontaneously. They recorded the album between 1994 and 1996 in what they called the Daft House, a home studio in Paris. It wasn't an exaggerated story. Thomas later confirmed that both Homework and Discovery were recorded and mixed in his bedroom. He even said that they mixed the records in a small JVC boombox his parents had given him as a child. What also surprised me when doing my research for this is they weren't trying to make an album. They were making tracks one at a time for clubs and singles, but after months of recording, they realized they had enough to fill an LP. Thomas later said that they did so many tracks that they suddenly realized they had an album on their hands. Guy Manuel explained that there wasn't a grand concept or storyline connecting the songs. They arranged everything afterward to create a balanced listening experience. During this time in the 1990s, major labels were spending huge amounts on studios, but the duo went pretty much in the opposite direction. Thomas said that they preferred working in bedrooms instead of expensive studios because they liked the freedom of making music with a few drum machines and synthesizers rather than relying on large recording budgets. If it hasn't already been made clear, their setup wasn't glamorous. It included included vintage synthesizers, drum machines, samplers, and sequencers, much of which was secondhand equipment. They would build tracks like this, essentially create grooves and patterns on drum machines and synths, record sessions of music, sampling those sections, rearrange them into full songs, add effects, filtering and processing, and build tension by gradually introducing and removing elements. Now, many tracks off Homework were designed to get you on the dance floor. The album has a raw live energy because of the songs grew out of DJ culture rather than the traditional album writing process. Several tracks existed for the club long before the project was assembled. Now, finally, the album dropped in January 1997. Now, to get a better understanding of this record, we do need to go through its key tracks first. Some of Daft Punk's most essential songs land here, and I know a good place to start. The funk was something that truly kicked the door open for them to being introduced to the world, and this was recorded before Homework was even released. The track appeared as a single in 1995, nearly 2 years before the record came out. It became one of the songs that helped establish Daft Punk within underground culture and drew attention from DJs across Europe and beyond. It wasn't a success at first. The initial pressing was only about 2,000 copies, largely under the radar until DJs like the Chemical Brothers started playing it in their sets. It had people wondering, who made this song? The sound of the song is very simple, yet it feels like it's so much more. There's a punch of the kick drum, a distorted riff in the second half, and the most recognizable synth riff of their career. Thomas later explained that the track was inspired by listening to West Coast G-Funk records, particularly the kind of music popularized by artists like Warren G. Daft Punk actually thought they were making something closer to gangster rap and electro than house music. It's interesting because this song does have that hip-hop swagger in a way that sounds different than a lot of 90s house tracks. The bass line was created using a Roland TB-303, a synthesizer famous for acid house music, which is also time, Aphex Twin was making a name for himself in the early 90s as well. Instead of using it in a traditional acid house way, they twisted it into that rubbery, growling riff that carries the entire song. While most dance songs try to keep introducing new ideas, the funk does the exact opposite. It takes one sound of the song and keeps utilizing it until every drop of its flavor is pretty much gone. Then new elements would drift in, others disappear, but the bass keeps the song at bay. This will be something that Daft Punk will become largely known for. If the groove is strong enough, you don't necessarily need a ton more ideas, which was basically their entire philosophy. The music video, directed by Spike Jonze, almost became as legendary as the song. It follows Charles' anthropomorphic dog man walking through New York City on crutches while carrying a boombox blasting the song itself. The video is weird, and yet it's still memorable. Today, it's widely regarded as one of the defining music videos of the 90s. It's always been one of my favorites ever. The funk was always the song I knew for the longest time. Sure, it does have a long runtime, but I don't think that overstays its welcome. Not for me, at least. Now, does it drag on a little? Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, many musical motifs do enter and leave. Those hi-hat hits, the best example for this. Specifically, by the time the synth riff is gone, it just keeps building, and we get that distorted synth riff in the second half of the song. As that app progresses, it gets more intense as claps start to come in for a few measures, as we get the kick drum again, which leads to that classic synth riff once more. Now, it's an amazing display of house music, and for this next one, I don't know a single soul who doesn't recognize this next track. If the funk was the spark in the club scene, Around the World was the explosion that made the duo impossible to ignore. It was released as a major second single from the album. It became one of the duo's first worldwide hits and remains one of the most recognizable electronic songs ever recorded. There are lyrics to this, and it's just this. Repeated over and over. In the album version, the phrase is repeated 144 times. On paper, it sounds like a lot more than that, but in practice, it's genius. Most songwriters try to keep your attention by adding new lyrics, but Daft Punk knew how to keep your attention by changing everything around the lyrics themselves. The phrase was just another instrument in the mix rather than just a centerpiece. Thomas Bangalter later described the track as essentially trying to make a chic-style disco record using a synthesizer bass and a robotic vocal effect. The influence of Nile Rodgers and Chic's Good Times can be heard all over the song's groove. Director Michel Gondry once analyzed the track and pointed out that it built from a handful of musical parts. Those few parts are constantly rearranged, dropped out, and brought back in different combinations. Now, the song is a masterclass of arrangement, to put it bluntly. When the bass line enters, the synth disappears as the drums get stripped back while the vocal returns. I never get lost when I'm listening to this song, despite its 7-minute runtime. The music video, directed by Michel Gondry, as I mentioned earlier, and choreographed by Blanca Lee, it's one of the most celebrated videos of the 90s. What makes it so special is that every group of dancers represents a different musical element. The robots are the vocals, the athletes are the bass line, the skeletons are the synths, the mummies are the guitar, and the disco women are the melodic synths. As the music changes, the dancers move accordingly as a visual diagram of the song's arrangement. Trust me, after you learn that, it's impossible to watch a video the same way ever again. Around the World made Daft Punk seen as innovators. Anybody can write a song with verses and choruses, but it takes a very different kind of confidence to build a 7-minute track around one phrase and somehow make it a worldwide hit. After the fake radio station of WDPK 83.7 FM, we transition over into Revolution 909. The title is a reference to the Roland TR 909, one of the most important drum machines in the history of house and techno music. The 909's punchy kick drum and hi-hats became a foundation in dance music throughout the 80s and 90s. The title works in two ways. Revolution signifies a cultural movement, and 909 works as the power behind that movement. This is one of the few explicit messages on the record. During the mid-1990s, French authorities were cracking down on rave culture. Large dance parties were often viewed with suspicion by politicians and law enforcement. Thomas Bangalter argued that officials didn't really understand house music and tended to associate the scene with problems rather than seeing it as a legitimate culture. The opening police announcement is widely understood as a satirical jab at those anti-rave attitudes. The title itself feels more militant than the previous ones we've covered so far. The drums hit harder, the bass line and groove never lets up, because once it gets going, it gets going. The music video, directed by Roman Coppola, starts with the police breaking up the rave, but then it takes a hard left turn into, and I shit you not, a spaghetti sauce tutorial. I wish I was joking. It goes through this time lapse of a tomato being planted, growing, harvested, becoming sauce, and ends up on a police officer's shirt, and the stain distracts him long enough for a raver to escape. It's so absurd, but I think that's what makes it so memorable. The song is a showcase on why people dance. It captures the tension between rave culture and authority, between freedom and control, between the underground and the establishment. Burnin' is the 13th track on the record that was released as a single that same year. It's one of the most purely house-oriented tracks on here. Now, it starts with a funky bass line with driving drums, but as it progresses, there's like these synth stabs and siren-like sounds just begin appearing. It becomes more and more intense, but it just never loses its rhythm. It's a clear love letter to Chicago house. Now, the duo were huge admirers of the Chicago house producers who helped create the genre in the 80s. Tracks like this show how deeply Thomas and Guy Manuel respected the American origins of dance music. The music video is something that doesn't get talked about enough. It follows a wild party in Chicago skyscraper that eventually catches fire. It doubles as a tribute to the Chicago house scene, which features real house legends such as DJ Sneak, Roger Sanchez, Derek Carter, Roy Davis Jr., and others who've inspired them. They even make a brief cameo in it themselves. It's still good, but is it just me, or are y'all also kind of getting a little tired of like this long runtime of these tracks? I ask this because there's a lot of tracks on this record that run over 5 minutes long. Wait, what? Who? Dr. Dre. I wish I was lying when I say this. Teachers is a 3-minute song containing lyrics that are nothing but names of artists, and is actually an important set of artists. These artists are the ones they're referencing that helped them influence their own sound. The song is simple, but I love that funk bass line. Artists like Todd Edwards and Romanthony are people that they will actually work with in the future. Now, Dr. Dre was such a surprise to me because it shows how much they actually appreciate that swagger of hip-hop that I mentioned earlier. But here's the thing. thing. Dr. Dre was already making a huge name for himself after like parting with NWA from the late 80s and establishing G-Funk in the West Coast in the early 90s. Now, it's clearly a tribute, even with the structure being borrowed from house music tradition. It has been noted by critics and researchers that this song is essentially Daft Punk's take on Shoutout records, particularly echoing the style of tracks like Paris Mitchell's Ghetto Shoutout. There's not much to say about this song. It's just damn good. Now, there's one more key track, and it makes me feel Alive is the 15th track on the record, clocking in at just over 5 minutes. The song is older than the record itself as well, just like with the funk. It began as an early Daft Punk track called The New Wave, which was released in 1994. It was during a period when Thomas and Guy Manuel were still trying to figure out what they would become. This is relentless. I enjoy the driving synthesizers and pulsing bass line. In a way, the title track sort of makes sense once you've listened to it. It's constantly waking you up with each new layer and synth line. By the end, it feels like it's larger than life. The title would become very important in Daft Punk's career as they would use it title to like their live projects, such as Alive 2007, which I made a video on. You should go check that out. Which it wasn't a hit, but it became synonymous with the legendary live performances. Okay, now those were the key tracks to this record. What about the rest? I think a few more are worth assessing in the grand scheme of things.
Hey, mister!
Now, it's relaxing. It sounds beautiful. It's a song that isn't talked about as much as I think it should. It opens with the sounds of ocean waves before introducing a warm riff, gentle percussion, heavily filtered vocal samples. It's sun-soaked and breezy, almost like watching waves roll onto a beach at sunset. For a while, many listeners didn't realize the vocal snippets came from the song called If You Leave Me Now by Viola Wills. That was news to me because I did not know there was a sample in the song at all. This also has a music video, surprisingly enough. It continues the story of Charles spending time with his girlfriend, enjoying a day by the ocean, and driving off into the sunset. Now, according to Daft Punk's own commentary, they wanted to cheer people up after the ending of Daft Punk, because I'm pretty sure this music video was released after they had broken up. Now, it's a very relaxed moment on the record. Not much to say here. Many consider Phoenix as a hidden gem on this record, and I could not agree more. Now, it's the bridge between the gritty club tracks and its more melodic moments. As the song progresses, Daft Punk adds more and more elements on top of the basic drum pattern, additional percussion, cymbals, and a looping synth hook, and a bouncing bass line. Each part of the production just keeps evolving. There's a sample of Don't Go Breaking My Heart by Elton John and Kiki D. Now, I did not know this because it is such a tiny fragment of it inserted into the song's hook that you would not know if it was sampled at all if you not tell you that, or if you had done research on it. The way it sounds, I would say it fits the title. Now, a phoenix is a mythical bird reborn from its own ashes, and the song has that feeling of constant lifting itself higher. Daft Punk never attached the title to a story, but I couldn't help but make note of that. This is going to be the last song I cover for this video. Now, if I were around in the 1990s, in the late 1990s specifically, and you told me that this would be the same duo that would make one of the greatest albums of all time in the 2000s, I would believe you, but I would still call you crazy. Now, it's their most unhinged track here, kind of like much how like their other track, Rock and Roll, is. It's 7.5 minutes of controlled chaos, and it's sort of to its detriment. Now look, I still think the song is quite good. It's just so ear-piercing by like the last leg. I get a little bit of ear fatigue by the last leg, just a little bit. It was released as a B-side to the original Defunct single before the record came out. For a while, fans believed it was the sound of a turntable being unplugged or malfunctioning. No, it's actually from the Roland Juno 106 synthesizer running through a Boss MT2 distortion pedal that produces that chainsaw sound that gets, like I mentioned earlier, incredibly ear-piercing by the last leg. Like, it's their most techno and industrial sound they have gotten on this record. And I think it's a clear sign that Justice would take inspirations from that and make their own incredible debut from the 2000s. And Homework is a great record. It's house music to the T, and its greatest strengths come from how well the duo keeps your attention, even if that meant going more into an experimental direction on some tracks. Now, they were clearly the newest and hottest things in dance music in the late 90s. Now, going back to this record and doing a review on it now, or at least telling you the story of it now. It's a lot more impressive than I gave it credit for like a few years ago when I first listened to it. On the technical side of things, there was clearly a lot more than just two guys meeting at a college and making an album. I believe that Homework is a statement of 90s electronic music and shows the fundamentals of the influences they sought after. Now, the runtime of these songs do bog it down a bit for me, with a lot of tracks being over 5 minutes long and some a lot less interesting than others. Those experimental tracks where I basically draw the line when it comes to making it easy to get through type of songs. I am willing to give this an A-. After Homework had been released, they were still relatively unknown outside of dance music circles, but over time, it would see success. Around the World charted number 3 in France, number 8 on the UK albums chart, number 150 on the Billboard 200 in the United States, and charted in 14 countries overall. By the time the 1990s concluded, it has sold over 2 million copies worldwide. It was an impressive feat for a duo that built an album primarily in a bedroom studio. Now, both Daft Punk and Around the World reached the US dance club charts, with Around the World even crossed over to the Billboard Hot 100. It was generally praised by critics for the production, club authenticity, innovation for repetition, and blending house music, techno, funk, and disco together. Now, its reputation only grew with time. Publications and critics began treating Homework as a landmark electronic record rather than merely a promising debut. It wasn't just a landmark, it was quite influential. It brought worldwide attention to French house, introduced mainstream audiences to underground house music, inspired a generation of electronic producers, laid the foundations for artists like Justice, the Daft Punk worshippers, and like their closest successors, the music that they would make in the 2000s. And it basically proved that electronic albums could be artistic statements and not just a collection of club singles. Now, I'll close this with my final thoughts. Homework isn't a perfect album, for sure. We all agree with that. And I don't think it needed to be. It's a clear essential for anyone looking to get into house music and from the 90s and house music at large. I think it's important to note that Daft Punk will go on to do greater things after this point in the future, but their debut I think was worth discussing and worth making a video on. Not just as an album, but as a story. Now that's going to do it. And as always, I'll see you on the next video. Cue the outro music.